Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you here, to be the chair of this session that is so close to my heart, and that has been my passion for a lifetime. So let me just, in these first 10 minutes, present, just give you an overview about what we are going to discuss in this amazing meeting today. So I'm Giselle Avruda. I'm a professor in circumpolar studies. My work has been to link or building bridges between environmental and social sciences along several years. I would like to start just talking about the importance of these drivers of change in the Arctic that are so specific and radical at the moment. So these are some images from Greenland, except for the central image that is from NASA, but showing exactly the huge impacts that we are observing in glaciers, in the sea ice, the sea ice retreat, and all of these events that are putting pressure into the Arctic landscape. When we talk about the Arctic, we are also discussing about subarctic and, of course, global impacts. I had the chance to work with Nicholas Stern in 2007, and I remember very well when he wrote and when he was disseminating the economics of climate change. He put it very well. He emphasized several important climate change threats in relation to the access to water, food, health, use of land, environment. So all of these are specific threats and specific pressures that are being put into landscapes and communities. These major drivers of change could be synthetically described in a very quick overview as exactly climate change impacts and adaptation, energy systems, and transportation systems. Because you may know that with the sea ice retreat, we will have new routes, new northern routes. And I'm talking about trade, I'm talking about extractive industries. So all of these drivers of change, these are, let's say, quick drivers of change that I mentioned, we are producing very serious social environmental impacts, locally and globally. And these impacts, they simply change the dynamics of this landscape, the dynamics of, let's say, biogeophysical, chemical balances that we have in this specific area. Of course, in the end of this chain are people, right? People that will have their habitats, their landscapes, their economies, their subsistence activities disrupted or disturbed or changed. So I would say that climate change and modernization became too intrinsically linked to forces that severely alter the context of local communities. I'm putting indigenous populations in these local communities because we are dealing with indigenous populations, but also local populations from Scotland. So we are referring to them and showing how these drivers of change are impacting their livelihoods, their subsistence. I'm also talking about the changes in ecosystems that are very important, not only because these traditional activities involve hunting, fishing, or cultural and social activities, but also because they impact ecosystem services, they impact the balance of these ecosystems, not only in the Arctic, but in the subarctic areas as well. So basically, I would say that the Arctic has approximately 4 million people scattered among provinces of Alaskan, Canadian, Scandinavian, and Russian Arctic. Arctic indigenous peoples have lived in Arctic lands for thousands of years, and they relied on hunting, fishing, gathering to sustain their communities. But this is changing dramatically now. So their economies are changing, and their traditional values that are associated to these activities and practices contributed to the development of unique economies. But these economies are under pressure. These economies are under threat. And I'm not only talking about their economies, but their community lifestyles. And of course, indigenous populations, local populations, they have this special connection to the place and the organisms that inhabited it. And climate change has much deeper and more personal impact than only on the economies or subsistence, but in their cultural and their skill set, in their knowledge. And I would like to mention that across the Arctic, along these several years of research, I would like to call the attention to traditional knowledge. This traditional knowledge of local communities that make it so important to engage them into climate change conversations and sustainable development conversations. And this is the important thing that I would like to bring to you today. The importance of the indigenous peoples, the local communities, being part of this debate, being part of this conversation, being part of sharing new perspectives, different perspectives, their perspectives in terms of their knowledge, their traditions, their practices, their way of seeing well-being, their way of understanding sustainable development. So the meaning of place, the meaning of tradition, culture, local practices that are being severely disrupted and changed. So the points I would like to make today, I would like to emphasize that local and indigenous communities, local communities, they have their traditional values, they have their practices, their activities, their culture that contributed to the development of unique economies and lifestyles. So this is a value in itself. We also know that those drivers of change are severely changing the landscape, changing the environment, changing these economies or their day-to-day activities. And the consequences of the phenomenon will become disproportionately more damaging due to the diversity of ecological pressures that are faced by Arctic ecosystem and societies. Another important point I'd like to make is that local and indigenous peoples, they want to be part of this current debate because they can offer this new perspective, this different perspective. They can offer their knowledge that can be really blended or shared by scientists as well. And I've been part of specific projects in Alaska and Canada where we can amazingly see that the remote sensing evidence match exactly the storytelling and the mapping of local communities in terms of snow and temperature and sea ice and the thickness of ice. So this is really important that we really share, that we share these different perspectives and we engage them in the process as an active participants of this process of decision making and exploration in terms of adapting to this large scale process that we are going to face in the decades ahead. So local and indigenous communities possess this immense knowledge of environments and practices, this knowledge set, this different knowledge set that will innovate and will add value to science. So I think that we needed to share the stage to know how to live together, to share this knowledge, to share this know-how, to share these skills and practices that have been developed and sustained them along so many thousands of years. And of course, these practices that are so fundamental from generation to generation within a community and form their cultural and spiritual identity. So all of these are extremely important elements that we could bring on board in order to share this perspective. And of course, this is absolutely powerful in terms of adaptation skills. So there is no doubt about the value of traditional knowledge to its holder and communities, and it's powerful knowledge. It's powerful knowledge, very significant knowledge that can help us to manage, to provide this environmental management that we need in order to interact and bring community cohesion and co-management to our landscapes, not only to the Arctic landscapes, but to our Scottish landscape that shares so many similarities with the Arctic. So what I propose here is to understand better these different perspectives, this different meaning of what is sustainable, and of course, go beyond this general sense of responsibility, go beyond sharing this Arctic citizenship that I explained in my latest book, sharing this sense of responsibility that comes from the individual but goes to the collective aspect. So go beyond any kind of corporate social responsibility to have this sense of responsibility in yourself as a citizen, as an Arctic citizen, or as a global citizen. So these are the main points I would like to make in order to brainstorm and trigger our debate today. Thank you. So next, we have Professor Alison Brown, that is a professor in anthropology and museum studies at the University of Aberdeen. Please, Professor Alison Brown, you are very welcome.
Thank you, Giselle. I'm just going to stop sharing your screen and share my own, okay?
Sure.
So is that working for everyone? You're seeing my screen okay? Great.
Yes,
okay, thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this session today. I'm very much looking forward to hearing the presentations from the other speakers and to discussing the issues that arise. So what I wanted to do was just give you very much a bit of a brief overview of some of the work that we've been doing in the anthropology department at Aberdeen. It is, of course, very much a whistle-stop tour because our talks are only supposed to be 6 or 7 minutes long. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to focus on the work that we're doing in relation to engaging local and Indigenous communities with museums. So museums and histories of science is one of the key research themes here at in Aberdeen in anthropology, and partnerships with museum collections. This is a focus that's important, not just because it builds upon the long-term fieldwork experience that many of us have in Aberdeen, but also because I think it helps museums gain access to working with communities that they might not otherwise be able to achieve, because often it's the case that museums or museum staff have to deal with many different communities, many different people, and they don't necessarily have the fieldwork expertise. So when I'm talking about partnerships, I suppose I'm thinking about partnerships not only with communities, but partnerships with museums themselves. So I just wanted to give you a few very quick examples of projects we've worked on. The first one here seemed very appropriate because it brings together, or brought together, Scots and Indigenous people in the Canadian fur trade. This was just from a few years ago. You can follow up on the website there if you want. This was a project that initially started off looking at museum collections in Scotland that originated from the fur trade in Canada, and actually ended up expanding out towards family collections because the stories were just much richer than what we found in the museums, where the documentation was often very imprecise. So we were concerned with looking at the history of the fur trade within particularly the northeast of Scotland, and linking that with families in Canada. And the example on the slide here, this is a family in Churchill, Manitoba, that I worked with, and they have family connections here in the northeast of Scotland as well. We used collections in Glasgow museums in this case to try and link these different families. Another example here is I wanted to highlight the work of my colleague Nancy Wakowicz. She's been working for a number of years with the Pond Inlet Women Sewing Collective. This was established by Nancy and her colleague Sheila Katzak in 2015. And this collective has been working to record traditional sewing practices, focusing on seal sewing. They've also done some work with museum collections, but also primarily they've been recording and presenting masterclasses on this work. They've been involved in a number of exhibitions as well. The next project I just very quickly want to draw your attention to is Blackfoot collections in UK museums. This is not an Arctic related project, but it's one that's very close to my heart, and I think it really gave me a sense through long-term fieldwork that I've done with Blackfoot folks about the importance of trying to get to grips with community perspectives on these kinds of projects. And Giselle mentioned co-production of knowledge, and this is something that's been really important for this particular project. We worked very hard trying to write the funding application together to bring in Blackfoot perspectives into the work that we planned to do. And we thought a lot about the ideas of consensus as far as that was concerned. And I think what was really important to remember, or what came out for me very clearly in this project, was that it's important for us to remember that in universities and museums, of course, working with local communities, Indigenous communities as well, is work, and it's important and it matters, but the stakes are much higher very often for those communities themselves. And so I'd just like to draw your attention to a comment that my colleague Carol Murray made. She's from the Blackfeet Nation. And when we were looking at that particular dress that you can see in the top image there, I remember her very clearly just stroking her hand across that dress and saying, you know, these are our life. It's not just a project. So now I want to spend the remainder of my few minutes just really very quickly talking about a project which is just finishing up in the anthropology department. I've had the great privilege to work with Tanya Argonova-Lowe, who is a Sakha scholar based in the anthropology department in Aberdeen, and with Eleanor Pearce, who is a postdoctoral researcher on our project. And we partnered with the British Museum for this project to work with this one object. It's a mammoth ivory model which shows the Isirch, which is a Sakha summer festival. It's the central summer festival that takes place in the Sakha Republic in Yakutia. I'll show you a map in a moment. And this model has been in the British Museum collection since 1866, and it's the earliest depiction of the Isirch that exists. What's important to know is that during the Soviet era, the Isirch, while it still continued to some degree, it was transformed quite remarkably. And in some cases, it wasn't practiced. So, for example, in the cities where Tanya herself grew up, she was never exposed to this growing up herself. But since the fall of the Soviet Union, there's been a huge revitalization movement with the Isirch, and I'll show you some photographs in a minute of how it looks today. So this is a project where people were very interested in gaining access to this model to see what they could learn from it, and to see how it might tie into local processes of mammoth ivory carving. So I'll just tell you a bit about what we did. For those of you who are unfamiliar, that's where Yakutsk is in the Sakha Republic. We undertook fieldwork mainly in Yakutsk, but also in some of the ulus, some of the villages further north and also further east of Yakutsk. We also undertook museum research in St. Petersburg and in Moscow and in London, and archival work in Paris and London. So here's just some images of the fieldwork that we undertook. We spoke to artists primarily. We undertook interviews looking at the idea of silence and what that meant in a post-socialist context. We worked with cultural specialists involved in the revival. We talked a lot with museum staff and educators about what it means to access museum collections. And we took part in various exhibition projects and visited lots of cirque celebrations over the course of the fieldwork. I'm not going to go through all of these different research questions, but they were basically bunched around 3 different areas to do with the idea of narrative and silence, and how objects, museum collections in particular, fitted into kind of trying to recover from silenced histories, and how that then also linked to the transmission of culture and tradition and skills. In the model itself, you can see, if you look at it very carefully, which we spent a lot of time doing, you can see how aspects of the model are replicated in what you see at today's cirque celebrations. So just some other examples there. So the activities that we undertook included an exhibition in the National Art Museum in Yakutsk. We also helped support the curation of a photographic exhibition. This was put together by students at Northeast Federal University, and they used images from the other Sakha collections in the British Museum. We worked with staff from the Ministry of Education to develop education packs, and I have to say I love this picture because it's probably the only time I've ever been transformed into a cartoon. So that's just an example of one of the education activities that we produced. We facilitated workshops for artists, particularly mammoth ivory carving students. This is an art which people are becoming really engaged with again. So we talked to lots of students as well as teachers about this. We also had activities in the UK. So for instance, the British Museum in particular wanted to learn about how their objects were being used, and they were very interested in the idea of intergenerational knowledge. And so we worked with an intergenerational group of art students from Central St. Martin's to see what they gained from working with this object. We also included knowledge exchange into the project. We had a delegation of researchers come from St. Petersburg and Yakutsk to work with the Siberian collections and primarily the Sakha collections in the UK. So those are in the British Museum, National Museums of Scotland. We also went to the Pitt Rivers Museum and the Cambridge Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology. We've also had a couple of other exhibitions or been involved in other exhibitions. So we hosted a photography exhibition in Aberdeen, and my colleague Tanya Arganobalo recently contributed to the Arctic show, which just closed last week at the British Museum itself. So I just wanted to wrap up just by just saying a few words, a few considerations really. So consideration 1 is really ensuring that there's community input into designing projects from the outset. And again, this is something which Giselle referred to. So we undertook consultation work in 2013 before the project application, the main application was submitted. And we worked and interviewed and spoke with a number of advisors in Yakutsk about what we might incorporate into this project and how it might meet the needs of local people. Consideration 2 is building in enough time. I think this is particularly important if you're partnering with museums. They've got lots of other things that they're involved with, particularly a large organisation like the British Museum. On the positive side, they've also got a large staff and are very involved in organising these kinds of projects. And so, you know, we had very, very, very good working relations with the British Museum and the NAM. The security checks, loan processes, all of these things did take a great deal of time. And so we had to try and align all of these different schedules and also our own teaching schedules. Building in enough time, of course, includes building in time for when things go wrong. I'm not going to go into what did go wrong, but like all projects, there are things which change and shift, and sometimes you have to respond to that. My third consideration, we have to talk about money at some point. This kind of work is expensive. you know, it was much easier to get this model out of Yakutsk in 1866 than it was to get it back in again in 2015. We were incredibly well supported by the HRC, our funding body, but I do think it was important that we did consultation work prior to putting in a grant application. It allowed us to write a much more convincing grant and to really understand the community needs when we put that project together. And we received the support from the Carnegie Trust for that consultation work. I've put here on the slide that the Carnegie Trust funding stream is now more limited, and so that means it's more difficult to get the kind of seed funding that's required for the community input aspects of this kind of work. So that's something I think we need to be thinking about. And then my final point is just expect the unexpected. Projects like this have got arms and legs. You can't plan for everything, and in my experience of these kinds of projects, really the most interesting and most exciting things come out of them are things that you just haven't anticipated at all. In our case, it involves students recognizing that the model in the British Museum is in fact only half the original model, and so they decided to make a second half as part of their diploma work. The two students up at the top of the slide there. And so bringing together these two different parts was really kind of, I suppose, bringing the missing pieces together, and we've used that kind of as a metaphor in the project overall. So I'm out of time now, so I'll leave it there, but thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Professor Alison Brown, for your brilliant presentation. Okay, so now Dr. Scientist Finn Danielson, lead of UArctic, the leader of the UArctic Thematic Network on Collaborative Resource Management, and also responsible for the Nordic Foundation for Development and Ecology. Please, the stage is yours.
You're on mute, Finn.
Can you see the screen now?
Yes, yes.
Thanks. And and you can hear me as well. Wonderful. Thank you very much for the invitation to attend the meeting today. My name is Finn Danielson. I'm an ecologist based in the Nordic Foundation for Development and Ecology in Copenhagen, Denmark. We are a group of biologists and social scientists who for a long time have been working on collaborative resource management and community-based monitoring. And I think it was really interesting to hear the previous presentation today. So I think this presentation can maybe be considered an example of how to actually move forward with connecting traditional knowledge approaches, as Professor Aruda talked about, with natural resource management decision-making, and with scientists, natural science knowledge about the environment in more practical, in a direct practical sense. I think that it can be seen as an example of that. So that some years ago, we got some funds from the government of Denmark to establish a thematic network on collaborative resource management. And I'll briefly tell about the aims and activities of this, why it's important, and some of the outcomes of this. The objective of this thematic network is capacity development in collaborative management and community monitoring. And we set up a target that within 3 years, training and co-management and monitoring should be incorporated into the curricula of the training institutions in the Arctic. Now, we realized after a while that 3 years was a little bit short, so we're opening up now and say this is what we are aiming for, to get training and co-management approaches and monitoring into the curricula. It might take longer time. And so by collaborative management, we mean management of natural resources where local stakeholders play a central role in the decision process. And by community monitoring, we talk about local stakeholders leading and undertaking monitoring of natural resources and resource use. And capacity development, of course, can be many different types of capacity development, from courses to to writing up guidelines and so on. And the activities for the last 2 years has mainly been focused on a seminar in Berlin, an experience exchange workshop in Hokkaido, and a training course in Nuuk. And the founding partners of this thematic network is Greenland Climate Research Center, Hokkaido University, University of Alaska, and our institution. As you know, thematic networks is the way that University of the Arctic works in terms of getting institutions and researchers that are interested in particular topics across the Arctic together and moving forward on achieving different goals in that particular area where they have a shared interest. And this one is about co-management and community-based monitoring. So at the seminar in Berlin was a side event to the Arctic Science Ministerial, where we discussed how in practice can we get community members' knowledge and observations more incorporated into decision-making processes in the Arctic countries, and what training is needed of public resource managers to facilitate that process. We also held a workshop the following year in Hokkaido discussing and trying to agree on what are the specific targets, what are the specific activities that we need to do in the thematic network to achieve our target of increasing the number of public resource managers and scientists that are able to engage in participatory approaches in relation to community monitoring and community-based management of resources. And then we held a course in Greenland for 25 government resource managers from all 5 municipalities of Greenland, where we discussed how in practice can you as a public servant encourage community members to support them in their efforts to observe the environment and to report what needs to be done in terms of taking decisions on quotas and your use of different fishing gear and other decisions related to natural resource management in Greenland. And when we did the evaluation of this course, one thing that people highlighted was that the exercises in the digital platform called PisunaNet was particularly very helpful. PisunaNet is an initiative of the Greenland Ministry of Fisheries and Hunting to systematically listen to the knowledge and observations of community members about natural resources. So in a number of Greenland communities, the village committee has set up a natural resource committee who themselves have decided which resources they want to look for, and then every 3 months they discuss how is it going with the resources. Are they becoming more plentiful, less plentiful, or it's the same, or we don't know? And is there is this change? If there's a change, is it a change that is important? And if it's important, is there something that could be done about it? What should be done, and by whom? And they report that to the municipal authorities. And all this information is then reflected in PisunaNet, so that decision makers at national level or in the municipalities can, with just 2-3 clicks, get information about what is happening on the ground as seen from the perspective of the community members. Why is this important? Well, we are seeing now the largest change in the distribution of species on Earth caused by climatic changes in 25,000 years. And this is impacting ecosystems, it's impacting the health, it's impacting governance, it's impacting economies, it's impacting almost everything, not only in the Arctic and the subarctic, but in large parts of the whole world. And adapting to global species redistribution requires all hands on deck. It requires respect, collaboration, exchange, cross-weaving of indigenous industry, community-based and formal academic science. And it requires decision-making at the most appropriate level. Natural resource management needs to be also promoting local livelihoods within sustainable levels. And we did a study of published monitoring systems over the last 20 years, and we learned that while scientists, here we see the time from data collection to decision making on the x-axis, and the spatial scale of impact, who take decisions on the basis of the monitoring systems on the other axis. And we see that scientist executed and participatory monitoring are very different from each other. Scientist executed monitoring, they mainly target national and international decision makers. It takes quite a time from you collect data to the data are ready, results are ready for decisions, whereas participatory monitoring, they lead to decisions at the village level, but and are very fast from you start collecting data until decisions can be taken. So the point here is that the scale of decision making and the implementation time differ. And without involvement of local people, the monitoring may sometimes be isolated academic exercises with limited impacts in the real world. So the outcome of the work so far been, we have established this thematic network on collaborative resource management. We've started a dialogue, and we're continuing this over the coming years. So we welcome very much cooperation with researchers and institutions in Scotland. I look forward to hear the oral presentations and the discussions today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Dennison. It was an amazing presentation. I would like to invite now Dr. Steve Taylor, Director of Center for Recreational Tourism Research at University of Highlands and Islands. You are very welcome, Dr. Taylor.
Good morning. I hope everybody can hear me and you can see my presentation on the screen. Okay, so the purpose of my presentation this morning is to talk about 3 Northern Periphery and Arctic Programme initiatives that I've been involved in as a partner or a lead partner, and that are focused on working and engaging with local and Indigenous communities on tourism aspects of community development. In the context of this talk, I'm going to be using quite a broad definition of community to include local communities as well as the business community, and extending that to a community of practice. Now, given the nature of the MPA programme, these are applied research projects with emphasis on working with local stakeholders to increase economic opportunities, although the 3 projects do have a strong environmental and social angle too. So these 3 projects are the development of slow adventure in Northern Territories, scientific tourism as a new marketing concept, and sustainable heritage areas partnerships for ecotourism. And although these are principally applied research projects, there have been and will be numerous opportunities for academic output related to them. I've managed to write several papers and book chapters on slow adventure, for example. Okay, so why undertake collaborative research? Well, I think the rationale lies under 4 key headings for me. So the first is addressing common challenges, whether that's youth migration, for example, or economic development that attempts to overcome issues of peripherality. The second is transnational sharing of good practice, quite an obvious one, whether that be through reports or webinars or on the structured learning journeys that we organised in one of these projects. The third is the richness that comes from being able to learn from transnational experiences and the differing contexts of how tourism is developing. And lastly, building these transnational communities of practice, bringing together communities, businesses, and other stakeholders who have a shared interest or passion in the development of sustainable tourism initiatives. Now, the challenges associated with sustainable development in peripheral Arctic areas have been intensified, obviously, by COVID. Regions with high dependence on tourism activity are experiencing new challenges, business closure and reduction in employment, for example. And these projects seek to work with local businesses and communities to try to facilitate post-COVID tourism recovery and to try to create a more ethical ethos for longer-term development. Okay, so the first project is Sustainable Heritage Areas Partnerships for Ecotourism. So the aim of SHAPE was to develop partnerships between organisations and groups who may not have traditionally worked together, but who could work together to explore how innovative approaches to tourism could be implemented in such a way that it will provide local economic value and also recognise the value of natural and cultural assets and ensure these are preserved in the process. The project focused extensively on stakeholder engagement in the mapping of cultural and natural assets and the identification of opportunities. This was done in 6 sustainable heritage areas across the North and Arctic region, such as biosphere reserves. We wanted them to then design a process from which we could learn across borders from the experiences of these different areas and countries. And in doing so, developed innovative ecotourism initiatives that would help to promote these assets while preserving their condition and supporting local identity, and ultimately finding ways to sustainably exploit these assets. The second project is called SciTour. It's scientific tourism, and this is an ongoing project led by the University of Lapland and with partners in Greenland and Iceland. So the aim is to use scientific tourism as an overarching marketing concept to develop and promote new tourism products that have a strong educational aspect and are imbued with engendering feelings of responsibility towards the environment, cultural heritage, and local communities. The Finnish and Greenlandic partners are engaging with Indigenous communities to ensure that these experiences are culturally sensitive and have meaningful impact in far northern communities. Now, the project was developed before the spread of COVID-19, but the outcomes are suited to this new reality. We believe that scientific learning can be a draw to local communities and help with immediate short-term recovery and long-term planning of the local tourism sector. To that end, having developed a new brand, Wonder Seekers, we started to work with local businesses across the Highlands to support them in the development of products that meet the scientific tourism guidelines. And while business engagement workshops have naturally been and are being carried out online, it's still our intention, and let's be optimistic here, that we will be able to undertake regional workshops. And these will draw together a range of local stakeholders, not only to encourage them to work together, but also to create a wave of interest really for embracing the concept and its ideals. The third project was called Saint, so Slow Adventure in Northern Territories. The approach we took here was to focus quite heavily on encouraging the business community, and especially those based in specific local communities, to cluster and work together collaboratively. So Slow Adventure is a form of tourism which, as its name suggests, avoids the adrenaline pumping hits of traditional adventure tourism experiences in favour of slow, immersive journeys, living in and travelling through wild spaces and natural places. It's believed to be a travel ethos for now. COVID-19 has turned the global travel industry upside down, and it's clear that this pandemic is having a profound effect on the tourism sector. And as the tourism sector in many countries is starting to move into this post-pandemic recovery phase, the near future will undoubtedly see a readjustment of what tourism looks like, with the opportunity to look at more sustainable or responsible tourism behaviour. Therefore, local events were held, because we could back then, centred on encouraging small businesses to develop collaborative slow adventure experiences imbued with local character and a sense of place, which would appeal to millennials and baby boomers in urban melting pots. And the Norwegian and Swedish partners in the project explored a further dimension. It was termed two-eyed seeing. This was to explore the interchange between Western approaches to SME development and the ways that Indigenous communities engage people through their long traditions of storytelling. And having trademarked Slow Adventure, it's now been spun off into a limited company in order to commercialize the potential of the brand and the ethos, and to try to establish slow adventure in the way that slow food and slow cities have gained recognition. So in conclusion, more than any of the projects that we've been involved in, these 3 initiatives have highlighted and reinforced the importance of engaging with local stakeholders. I think that ultimately we here in the Highlands have a real affinity with Arctic and peri-Arctic partners in a way that we just don't with Central European or Mediterranean partners. I guess in part this is due to commonalities, being rich in natural and cultural assets, but also the common challenges that we face in order to overcome demographic issues and fragile local environments, and also the characteristics we share, from the vicissitudes of the weather to the relative peripherality to international markets. Each of these projects has taken a different approach, but each is characterized by a drive to aid the development of local communities through sympathetic and sustainable tourism development. Direct engagement with local stakeholders is key. Not only local businesses, but community councils, destination management organizations, and community members. Each project has reinforced to us the importance of bringing local communities and local communities of practice together to collaborate, to work together to increase the value of the tourism offer, to engender greater buy-in to sustainable tourism as a means of community development, and ultimately to make meaningful change to local communities. And thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you, and thanks very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Taylor, for this fascinating set of projects that you are involved in. Thank you. I'd like to invite Dr. Katerina Strani, Head of Cultural Studies Section and Deputy Director of the Intercultural Research Center at Heriot-Watt University. You are very welcome, Dr. Strani.
Hello everyone, I'm Katerina Strani, and in this short presentation I'll be discussing some of my projects and I'll be focusing on existing and future Arctic collaborations on the theme of languages and on the theme of communities. Some of these projects are applied research projects, similarly to what Dr. Taylor presented before me. Now let's see if I can work this. There we are, good. So firstly, the focus on languages. I'm currently leading a project called Indilan, which stands for Mobile Virtual Learning for Indigenous Languages. The project is funded by the European Union, and it is developing an app as an educational tool for users to learn Gaelic, Scots, Cornish, Northern Sami, Basque, and Galician, but also the cultures of their speakers. There is a focus with this project on the cultures connected with these indigenous languages, and there's no separation of language from its speakers. With this project, we hope to achieve a wider interest in learning indigenous, excuse me, in endangered languages. So we are aiming at language revitalization, but also an awareness of the speakers' cultures, as well as developing transferable skills. The Arctic partner in this project is the Sami Council in Karasjok in the Norwegian part of Sápmi, which is the cultural region inhabited by the Sami people. Unlike other partners in this project, the Sami Council chose to focus on the concept of indigeneity, and we did some interesting work on this. So what are indigenous people, what are indigenous languages, and the difference between what they call indigenous languages and indigenous peoples' languages. The complexity of the concept was discussed in the project's first report, which is available on our website. There was also a focus on land and traditions such as reindeer herding, awareness of different Sami languages. This app is focusing on this Northern Sami variant, but there are other Sami languages. And also the effect of COVID restrictions and the imposition of borders. One of the Sami Council colleagues said that because of COVID restrictions, this was the first time we had a border between Norway and Finland. Aile Javo, who is the Secretary General of the Sami Council, presented Indilan last month at the Arctic Connections event, which was organized by the Scottish Government and UNESCO. The event was on indigenous languages in a digital age. We had our kickoff meeting, our Indilan kickoff meeting in October 2019 in Edinburgh. And it was Aile Javo's first visit to Edinburgh, which was quite exciting, but she was only here for a day. So there was huge pressure on us to show her around Edinburgh in only one day. You can see a picture of all partners here at the bottom left. I don't know if you can see my cursor, probably not, but you can see at the bottom left, all of us at Heriot-Watt campus in front of the James Watt statue. And then on the right, you can see some photos of us on the mound and in front of the castle. Aile Javo is the one with the red jacket, and the other one is the Basque partner. But if you take a look here on the top left, you will see that Aile brought with her a guksi for her coffee instead of using cups. Like the rest of us did. Guksi is a Sami drinking cup, which is personal each person has their own, and is only rinsed with clean water without any detergents, as Isla said, and dried with a cloth after use. And this was just one tiny, tiny example of Sami sustainable ways of living. And we all made a pledge to buy our own personal guksi when we visited Karasjok for our next meeting. But unfortunately, the meeting was scheduled for June 2020, and we couldn't travel to Karasjok due to COVID-19 restrictions. So we have to wait for that. Indilan is based on the Moving Languages project, which is also funded by the EU and in which we've collaborated. Moving Languages is a refugee language and culture app, which helps users learn Finnish, Swedish, and other European languages, English, Spanish, Italian, and German. The app covers 26 refugee languages. And the Arctic partners for that project were Lenmera Oy in Helsinki and Folkuniversitetet in Sweden, which is an adult education association connected to various universities in Sweden. The focus for this project were refugee languages and mobile learning resources for newly arrived migrants and refugees in Finland and Sweden. And what we looked at, some of the questions we looked at, were the role of language in integration, whatever that is or whatever that looks like. The role of language as a requirement for citizenship, language hierarchies in the context of migration. And feedback from the refugee organizations highlighted the significance of the culture feature of this app, which enabled the users to learn more about the heritage of a host culture and society. And this is why we were very keen to keep this culture feature for the Indilan project. And this is connected to our collaborations on communities and migration. So we focused, under this theme, we focused particularly on racialization, racism, and hate speech. The RADAR project in which we collaborated was again funded by the European Commission. RADAR stands for Regulating Anti-Discrimination and Anti-Racism. For this project, we researched racializing and exclusionary effects of language in various countries, including Finland. And the research included collaboration with community and local organizations in Finland. This research led to a panel on cross-cultural understandings of race for ETMU, which is the Society for the Study of Ethnic Relations and International Migrations in Finland. So I went to the University of Jyväskylä in 2017 and chaired this panel with Finnish and Danish academics. And all this research led to the idea for the Intertrainee project. This was another EU-funded project that I coordinated, which developed an online credit-bearing course on intercultural training for educators of adult migrants. The course involved research across 4 countries, including Finland, and the Arctic partner was an NGO in Helsinki called Learning for Integration. The focus for this project was migration in Finland, but also intercultural training for educators. This project has just ended this Friday, the 28th of February. And here are some photos of gorgeous Jyväskylä in Finland in the snow in November. The picture at the bottom right was taken from inside the university where the ETMU conference was taking place. But as you can see, I was very, very interested in the landscape. Our existing collaborations on indigenous languages, on communities, on migration, and on inclusive societies have created some impact and generated interesting results. But we're also very keen to expand these collaborations in these areas, but also in the following areas. We'd like to continue our research on indigeneity. We'd like to also continue our research on migration and multicultural communities, remoteness in islands, and here I'd like to mention my colleague Kate McCulloch's project on northern connections across the Northern Isles. It would be great if we could continue such collaborations. Lessons for sustainability, for example. Also cultural resilience, bearing in mind that resilience is a concept that has been rather overused and criticized. And lastly, the IRC director, Mairead Nikra, has just started a project exploring the relationship between people and landscape, with particular reference to the cultural practices of place names. This is part of a working group on place wisdom of the International Society for European Ethnology and Folklore. And our future strategy focuses on all these topics and all these themes, and we would very much welcome a discussion and future collaborations with Arctic partners. Thank you very much for the time and your attention, and I'm very much looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Dr. Strani. It's a fantastic presentation, fantastic project you are involved in. I would like to invite Jessica Penny for her presentation. Please, Jessica, we are very happy to have you here. I have a special feeling for the Canadian First Nations and the Indigenous populations from Canada. Please, Jessica, you are very welcome.
Great, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm just trying to figure out a way to turn on my my camera. Can't seem to do that right now, but that's fine. As long as you can see my slides, okay? Can you see me okay, or can you see my slides?
Yeah, we can see your slides.
Okay, that's fine then. Hi everyone, thanks for having me today. So I'm Jessica Penny. I'm from an Arctic Indigenous community. I'm an Inuit researcher from Canada. Today I'll give a brief overview of who I am, what I'm currently working on, and my experience with engaging local and Indigenous communities in research. So the topic at hand today, as we've seen, is showcasing the kind of current state of community engagement in the Arctic. So I'll discuss a few points that I feel are essential when doing work that may impact the lives and well-being of people in the Arctic. So a little bit of context about me. Reflexivity and positionality are really important to me from a personal ethics standpoint, but also in terms of research methodology. I'm a PhD student at the University of Glasgow. I'm also a research associate at Kaigartit Health Research Centre in Canada. So there are 4 Inuit regions in Canada, and I'm connected to 2 of them. So my maternal family is from the region of Nunatsiavut, but I was raised in the territory of Nunavut. My PhD is based in Rigolet, Nunatsiavut, which has a population of about 300 people, and it's my maternal hometown. But as I said, I also work with Kaigartit in Nunavut, which is an independent nonprofit community research institute, and also a member of UArctic. So in terms of what I'm working on mostly right now would be my PhD, but that focuses on the impacts of the Muskrat Falls hydroelectric project on the community of Rigolet. So it's a hydroelectric project being built by the state just downstream from the community of Rigolet. And concerns have been raised about methyl mercury contamination through previous research that's been undertaken. So methyl mercury is a naturally occurring neurotoxin that can increase in the reservoir creation process of hydroelectric projects as flooded materials break down. It can then bioaccumulate in the food chain, and this is a significant concern for Inuit communities who we very much focus on or rely on wild foods such as seals and fish. And so this research project that I'm working on aims to look at community perspectives on the project and what people think the impacts will be, as well as working closely with the Nunatsiavut government to consider health risk communication strategies for the future. And the Nunatsiavut government is the self-governing Inuit region of Nunatsiavut. So today I kind of wanted to discuss 3 key pieces of best practice that I've experienced as a researcher in different Inuit communities, and also learned about from other researchers and community members that I think can result in ethical and meaningful research outcomes. The first of these is working with Arctic-based researchers. So I believe it's very important to work and partner with existing experts in the community, and this can be realized in a variety of forms. So experts may or may not have post-secondary degrees. They may or may not work in the research field, but in my experience, that doesn't matter. And the people who are the best suited to lead a research project or be part of a research project are often those who live there, who understand the context, who have the knowledge to help a research project flourish. And in part and connected to that is the importance of incorporating community capacity building into projects. So that can be training community members to undertake research, whether that is technical training in equipment or research methods training. I've seen that this is a really great strategy that will result in research flourishing regardless of researchers' presence. So for example, right now in the times of COVID-19, many of us are unable to travel to our research sites. But I sit on some research funding committee bodies, and what we've seen is that the research projects that are flourishing right now are the ones where data collection can continue without researchers having to travel, because community members are able to do that and lead research projects. So that's a really important strength that I think we need to build on. The next kind of discussion point is one that has actually been brought up by a previous speaker, and that's the importance of including Indigenous communities throughout the research process and through any research initiatives. And so I'm kind of a last minute addition to this discussion, which came out of a conversation that I had with the organizers around this, this event not having any Indigenous representation from actual Indigenous community members. And that's not a criticism at all, but more of a discussion point that we need to consider who's in the room in Arctic Indigenous research, who's being engaged. And in a research context, this means really thorough prior consultation. It also includes asking certain questions about what kind of outputs are being left behind in research projects. How is data being shared? Who owns data? Can research outputs be translated into Indigenous languages to create that knowledge? But key to all of this is the importance of relationships. And one thing that I wanted to note as well is to not be presumptuous that your research will work, or that the community wants you to do this work, or that you're welcome in the community. Even myself, even though I'm working in my maternal hometown, I incorporated a long consultation process into my PhD, which included traveling to multiple communities, talking to the self-governing Inuit region to make sure that the data that I want to produce will be useful and can actually have an impact. So key to all of this, I believe, is being reflexive about the research interests and the power dynamics that are at hand. Now, finally, the third main point that I wanted to discuss today is centering community ethics. So in terms of thinking about community-specific ethical frameworks that can have an impact on shaping the research projects, each community has their own ethical framework that they work within, and that recognizing that and working within that and understanding that can help a research project really flourish in a way that is beneficial to the community and to everyone involved. An example that I wanted to discuss about, in relation to this is Qayugartit's Ethics Qatimayit. And the Ethics Qatimayit I'm a voluntary member of, and it's essentially a community-based research ethics board. So projects from Qayugartit go through this Ethics Qatimayit, and we discuss the project, and part of that is considering the usual REB kind of review process, but including an element of community engagement as key for the research process and the review process. So that includes considerations for community engagement, partnerships, acknowledging contributions from the community. How will that be compensated? So this is grounded in a research model that centers Pitiyarnik. So that's goodness, kindness, and compassion, and Inuqatikitiarnik. So it's respect for a shared humanity. And this research model recognizes the way that ethics and methods are intertwined, which helps a research project reflect Nunavut Inuit values and results in a more robust and thorough research project with benefits for the community. And so this is specific to Nunavut Inuit, and each community will have their own ethics. So I really encourage you to explore that in any research projects with Arctic Indigenous communities. So finally, just coming to a conclusion here, I just wanted to stress the importance of engaging local and Arctic Indigenous peoples and how this should be a collaborative process. It should be based on reflexivity and shared community values that guide the research process. And I just want to note here that my intention is not to assert that the way that I do things is the best, or it's the only way or the right way, just to acknowledge that these are some of the best practices that I've seen and experienced. And I hope that this can be a kind of a helpful discussion or inform your engagement with Arctic Indigenous communities moving forward. Nakumi. I will stop there.
Thank you very much, Jessica, for your great inputs about, I really liked the point you made about respect for shared humanity. It really touched me. I think it's time for us to open discussions and understand how we can join forces and what are the opportunities and barriers that we face for further research in this field. I think it's time for your inputs on more specific questions.